Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're back with another interview to talk about some interesting innovation around reporting data during the climate crisis. Now, you know, most of us still struggle to get our heads around the science of climate change, but the impacts are clearly felt almost every day somewhere in the United States. And in June 2021, USAFacts reports 97 million people in the United States experienced hotter than average temperatures, including the record-shattering heat in the American West, which really made a lot of us pay attention. But in August, the data shows that 84.8 million Americans, still a third of the country, were suffering from higher than average temperatures. Now, understanding how persistent but distributed the impact of the climate crisis is helps us to internalize the need to make changes in our own lives. So our guest, Tanveer-Ali, is a data visualization analyst at USAFacts, the organization I cited a moment ago. The Bellevue, Washington-based nonprofit, founded by former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, recently introduced a convenient way to keep tabs on the consequences of the climate crisis. It's called the Climate in the US Experience, and it provides regularly updated visualizations of a variety of climate statistics and useful insights into how life is changing for us and our neighbors. You can dive into this data yourself at usafacts.org/issues/climate. That's usafacts.org/issues/climate. Welcome to the show, Tanveer. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Given the circumstances, we're in the middle of a climate crisis. So can you tell me first, what was it that inspired USAFacts to build the Climate in the US dashboard now? Are you seeing that there's a lot more interest amongst citizens and business in this information?
So at USAFacts, we're always looking for data that could help inform conversations that people are having at the moment. We look at our own analytics, what's happening politically, news topics, and of course, social media. In the last few years, we've been focusing a lot on COVID, obviously, but climate has become an important issue and will continue to be a topic of interest for decades. We just saw world leaders meet in Glasgow to talk about greenhouse gas emissions around the world. And we noticed there's a lot of rhetoric and conversation about what we should do about climate trends. And there are some questions about whether the trends are showing change or not.
Right.
We at USAFacts don't want to be we don't want to lead the conversation, but we want to ground the conversation in facts, and we believe the data that we are providing is a great place to start.
Well, let's just dig into USAFacts for a second. Steve Ballmer left Microsoft and, amongst other things, bought a basketball team and started USAFacts. What's the mission of USAFacts?
So USAFacts is a nonprofit website, an organization that is dedicated to making government data easy for all to understand and access. We provide accessible analysis on spending in the United States, outcomes, and what people really talk about in their public debates. Our only goal is to make sure people have the facts. We don't tell people what to think, what to do with it. We just want people to start from the same level in these issues.
So what data sources did you use to build the Climate in the US dashboard?
So we only use government data.
Okay.
We believe that's the most unbiased way to approach many topics in the country. So right now we have basic temperature data and precipitation data going back to the 1895, I believe. We sourced it from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. They're the agency responsible for weather forecasts and keeping climate data as well. So the data we used, the reason why we use the data is because we did notice some what we thought was odd weather in the past several months. There's a Texas winter storm in February. There was here out in Seattle, we had 108 degrees temperature in June, which is unheard of in my head. But we just thought, is this normal? Like, is this something that has been happening historically? and the problem was like, there's no way to define normal unless we do it statistically. We based it on the 20th century average. So we took every year in the 20th century, looked at the average temperature of a given month in a given county, and average it out. And that's what we're comparing to when we were trying to figure out what's normal, what's hotter, what's colder, what's wetter, what's drier than normal. Especially with respect to temperature, the frequency of warmer temperatures, what we characterize as warmer temperatures, has been noticeably happening more often all across the country.
So one of the intriguing facts that you point out on the site is that the U.S. hasn't experienced average or below average temperatures compared to the 20th century average since December 1962. That's 59 years ago. Can you explain how that data point contains variations by state and region, and what it tells us about whether we were ignoring climate change far longer than the evidence was available, if only we had seen it in the sort of visualized form?
So I want to make a point. Like, we're not trying to say what we should have done, what we shouldn't have done.
I'm not suggesting. I'm asking whether or not, from your perspective as an analyst, you see that there was evidence for a long time. Since December 1962, that was the last time. None of the counties, 3,100 plus counties in the United States, they all had average temperatures. Since then, every part of the nation has been touched one way or the other at some point with above average or below average temperatures. But I have noticed since 2000, a number of counties, specifically in the West, California and Arizona, and Florida, they've had much more of these experiences. As I said earlier, I guess USAFacts doesn't want to project or decide like what should and shouldn't be done, but we do want to make it clear that these are the trends, and these trends are affecting every part of the country. Well, and you know, it was Peter Drucker who said what gets measured can be changed, and or some variation thereon. And the visualization that's possible today using computers is a powerful way to translate the statistical information that you're describing into something that can be understood at a glance. Tell us, what makes a visualization valuable, and are there ways for our listeners to recognize when they're seeing bad visualization?
So good visualizations, kind of like text, like they are understandable. Like they are accessible and understandable if you're trying to convey information. But unlike text, they just display the data information in a way that otherwise would be complex, but can be figured out within like moments of seeing it. It's about the storytelling. It's the context that you want to convey. Good visualizations are maybe dense with data, but they don't overwhelm you with the density unless you want to delve in deeper. Colors, annotations, labeling, they all play into this. Our experience on the climate portal uses colors pretty effectively, I would say, in describing what's hotter, what's colder, using people's understanding of, you know, a bright orange must mean hotter, deep blue must be colder. It really connects with people and makes people understand based on what they're seeing. So what's bad? I guess if you're trying to show everything at once, all the details, like if you've ever seen a pie graph with 12 wedges or something, and you're trying to figure out the angles and stuff, like you don't want your users to work for figuring it out. You want the data to be right there. And the other thing I would say, the other important thing is don't be misleading with your data, I guess. Sometimes I've seen data sets where they're being selective with their timeline. Like limiting it just to make a point, or the scaling of a line graph sometimes is misleading, showing more of a change than there actually was. These are all decisions we make, but those are, I would say, are the worst offenses.
Well, and breaking it out by different topics and not conflating a bunch of information to create overly complex visualization or to try to make a point. And going back to what you said earlier, it's clear USAFacts is simply trying to report this stuff as you read it. One of the visualizations I found myself browsing on a month-to-month basis, looking at it each month of the year, was the precipitation report. And the pattern of rainfall, is clear that at least some part of this country is getting above average precipitation at any point in the year, all year long. What regions are seeing sustained extreme rain and storms?
What I've inferred from this data is, especially in recent years, the Gulf Coast and East Coast often fall into the wetter category. Conversely, the Western United States tends to have less, I shouldn't say rainfall, I should say precipitation. We include snow, hail, anything that falls from the sky in this category. But generally speaking, the western part of the United States doesn't have the severity that the Gulf Coast and the East Coast do.
On the other hand, on the West Coast, the changing weather patterns are resulting in more extreme short-term rain that could cause a flash flood. Have you guys considered extending some of the visualization to showing flooding risk or other kinds of additional implications of the precipitation or the extremes in hot and cold?
So what you see today on the portal, we have many plans for extending it in the future. Some of the stuff we have talked about is related specifically to wetness, dryness. There's some great drought data from NOAA that we are considering implementing, and we have also looked at flooding data from the government. There's some thought going on in terms of like how we integrate this into the simplified structure that we've created, but we've definitely talked about this.
So which states would you say, based on the data you're looking at, are most impacted and appearing to continue to get worse?
I'm cautious to say worse, but I mentioned the states earlier, California and Arizona and Florida. From our analysis, we found several counties that have been impacted. Oddly, in California, the northern part, which is a place where we've seen a lot of wildfires, they've been impacted really noticeably based on temperature. Arizona, New Mexico, the desert regions of the United States also have warmer than usual temperatures, even though they're used to a very narrow band of degrees Fahrenheit. It's noticeable, it's statistically noticeable. And Florida, specifically, the southern part has had some variation as well.
So does the data also suggest that there are states that will remain, for lack of a better way of putting it, better places to live because of the lower climate impacts?
Yeah, I'm cautious to say what's a bad and good place to live, but what I can tell you is in the northern part of the country doesn't fall into the warmer category as nearly as often as the southern part of the country, but that is merely a function of statistics, because Montana and Alaska, those states can have a wildly different summer every year, and that's expected. That's what happened in 2000. So generally, the trends are all going upward, or mostly going upward in most places. I shouldn't say all. But it's hard to say what's worse and what's better. I mean, some people might like warmer weather in the north in the coming years. Some people won't. So yeah.
And that's personal preference, but yeah. The data is a basis for making a decision based on those preferences. One of the interesting data points that you also share is the number of Americans who are experiencing on a monthly basis drier or wetter weather than average. And looking over the course of 2020 and 2021, it looks to me like in general, everybody's just seeing more wetter weather rather than drier on the average. In January 2020, 1.3 million Americans saw wetter than average weather, and none of them saw drier than average. Is that a trend that you see in the data over the long term, that there's an extreme in increased rain activity? And is there a pattern that you see in it that reflects the changing amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? Are you doing anything to try to relate that number to the impacts that it produces?
So when it comes to defining what's wetter and what's drier, the way we've done it is through statistics. And the tricky thing is with drier, there's a floor to how dry you can get, 0 inches. So sometimes within how we've just defined statistics, it may not be drier in that definition. However, I will say it does happen. I think this summer, a couple of counties in southwestern Montana, I looked it up, have had this experience. And I know that Alaska, parts of Alaska have had dry months throughout the last decade. As far as what more we could do on this issue of precipitation and showing the data clearly, as I mentioned earlier, drought data we're looking at, we could look at the flood data, but we could also look at daily data. We are exploring the idea of bringing in localized data and just like count up the number of days where there's 0 inches of rain, or not number of days,
right,
like months, of course, days, or temperatures above 100 degrees. There's a lot of possibilities when you just look at the facts, and we are exploring all of it.
Well, I think the other, and this is a really important component of the site, is that you address issues of equity and race in the midst of the climate crisis. The site reports that, for instance, Native Americans and Native Alaskans are almost twice as likely to be living in areas experiencing abnormal climate conditions. How would you characterize the impact of climate change and how it varies by race? So
we think this was a really unique way of showing temperature and precipitation data in both a unique way and also in a fair way, because this affects people, and people live places, and some places are more impacted than others. I said earlier that southwestern United States, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Florida have been deeply affected, and those states have high numbers of Hispanic people. Mm-hmm. And New Mexico and Arizona specifically have a large number of Native American people as well. Alaska, the Alaskan natives, they've had to experience some extreme heat in the recent years. As every month goes on, as time goes on, different places in the United States will be affected, but it is worth noting that certain parts of the United States, certain parts of the country will have already been affected more, and they do have different diverse makeup than the nation as a whole.
Do you have an impression, based on the data, of the impact in particularly by demographic or racial impact within cities versus the country? Are cities suffering more because of the heat effect, for instance? The temperatures are higher because of the concentration of buildings and concrete than a rural area? That is
something we have talked about. We haven't done that analysis yet. We're happy to do it, and if you want to have me on here again to talk about it, I'd love to. But,
I'd love to see that visualization. I think that's another area where, from our perspective, covering this topic, there's a serious disconnect between the perception of city living and rural living. Each of them sees the other as the problem, and they believe that if we can put this into some sort of visual form based on good solid data, that we can have a better dialogue about the kinds of trade-offs that need to happen in both those lifestyles. And it's great to hear that you're continuing to think about how to develop the site. Looking at a couple of years, what is your longer term goal for the climate in the U.S. experience?
So we do, and this is an ongoing feature, and don't see an end in sight, honestly. Perhaps by the time you post this episode, we'll have released our next addition to this experience. There are more than 3,100 counties in the US. We're going to create a page for every single one of them. And what you'll see on them is a little different experience. It's less around maps and comparing places to each other. But you will be able to see 120 plus years of history all at once in one chart. We're really excited by that. That should be available, if not by the time your listeners hear this, shortly after.
That's interesting. I look at this. I also am in the Seattle area. Our peak temperature on the day you mentioned earlier wasn't 108, but 112.
Oh, yeah.
And to look at my county, where I've lived most of my 60 years, is over the long term is a really eye-opening experience to see how much things have changed, how much the weather has changed over the course of my life and so forth. But to be able to bring it into a nutshell kind of experience and see it visualized, I think will be a powerful tool for getting people to rethink their relationship with their world. So where should our listeners start on the climate in the US? What's your recommendation for how to begin to take all this information in?
So it really depends on how you want to connect with it. We believe we want to meet people where they are. And the localized level is a great way to do that, which is why we're creating the county pages. People most connect with where they live or who they are demographically, and we are providing both. So if that's an entry point to this conversation, to these sets of facts, we encourage people to take it.
Well, Tanveer, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've been talking with Tanveer-Ali. He is a data visualization analyst at USAFacts. They're based in Bellevue, Washington. It's a nonprofit that is seeking to provide greater information about a variety of topics, not only the environment, but education, healthcare, immigration, trade, economic, racial issues, a variety of things. And obviously they're growing. Folks, I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this podcast and other Earth 911 podcasts with your friends, your family, strangers on the street, that old college buddy that you haven't seen in 40 years. Give them a call and tell them they need to start paying attention to the environment and their role in it. This is Earth 911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. We will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, please take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.